Live from our studio audience, it's 5 More Minutes, Mom, with your hosts, Brielle and Guerlain, on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Did you have a nice New Year's, Guerlain?
It was cool. How about yours?
You're so effusive. It was very nice. I actually spent it with Connor from Fruity Cereal because we live near each other. At the bottom of the screen is going to be the roller with all of our social media information. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at 5MMETV. And then you can follow me and Guerlain as well as like the whole ETB network. So yeah.
Yep, all that jazz. As always.
Yeah, I forgot how many M's were in our okay, so today's topic, we're starting the new year off right, in my opinion. We are starting it off and we're going to be talking about feminism. We're going to be talking about feminism in the shows and movies that we watched as kids, and kind of how those shows, I think, they didn't make me a feminist, like, let's be honest, but they did kind of explain certain ideas to me and get me kind of started on that path that I would eventually culminate in like high school and college when I became like a women's studies minor, and fully embraced that. So yeah.
Like what shows did that for you?
I mean, I just feel like our generation, like the generation of like 90s, early 2000s TV shows, there were a lot of like girl power shows, like Powerpuff Girls, like, Totally Spies, like Winx Club and like Witch. And, there were a lot of shows, more specifically, I think cartoons, but there were a lot of shows that had all female casts, Kim Possible,
Right.
that were centered around girls, centered around women, and they did all these amazing things. And I think that's really cool. Now, granted, there were also plenty of shows where there was like one girl character, but
Mm,
and that was very common too. It was very weird. It was like either there was one girl or there were all girls, like,
Right.
But I think it was a really great time for little girls, that there really was a lot for them to choose from. And I don't think that really exists anymore. I feel like nowadays people are like, girls don't like cartoons, which is so dumb.
Yeah, it was kind of like that back then too. When you mentioned Impossible, I know the creators of Impossible specifically, they created that for their own daughters because
Mhm.
they were looking around as like, well, I think one of them had two little girls or whatever. It's like, yeah, I have two little girls. Um, Me and my friends, we had the likes of James Bond and whatnot to look up to
Mhm.
and everything. Who does the girls have to look forward to? So they created Impossible.
Yeah.
So there was that stigma of girls don't watch cartoons back then too. But to your point, it does seem is even more today. It's like 50-50. It's starting to uh lighten up a bit, but
Yeah, I mean, again, with like thinking about like our diversity episode where we talked about how there's like a little bit of a backslide, I
mm,
feel like that exists with feminism as well. I feel like
mm,
we're having a little bit of a backslide,
okay,
into, you know, th- where it's like almost everyone's being too like, what's the word? Like they're trying to be like too, I guess, woke. Um, because that isn't to say that the feminism in those cartoons was perfect. It absolutely was not. It was very, a lot of it was very corporate girl power, which is like the idea of like using feminism to further a corporate idea or a capitalist agenda or to sell toys, which it definitely was. Because if you have the Wings Club, which has like six girls, that's six dolls that they can, buy. And a lot of it was very like girls rule, boys drool, which isn't
right.
really, feminist, but like, so I will say that the feminism wasn't perfect. It was very surface level. It was very like babies first,
Right.
babies first bell hooks. But I think that's what you need when you're a kid. Like, you don't need, like, theory when you're a kid. You don't need to understand the nuances of, like, first, second, third wave. You just need to know that girls are capable of doing anything that boys can do, and boys and girls are equal. And I think those shows did a really good job of that, because it was teaching that kind of simplistic idea.
Mm. Powerpuff Girls, I feel they had a really good episode on that, title Equal
Yeah.
Fights. Is that you was gonna bring that up?
Yeah, I was
That
gonna bring up the Powerpuff Girls episode with the Super Friends, and they were like, "Who does
oh,
the cooking and the cleaning? Our dad. Who takes out the
that's
trash?
funny.
Bubbles," or something like that. Yeah.
That was a funny episode. I was thinking of another one though, but that one too.
Okay.
The one with, the supervillain, Femme Fatale,
Yes.
her.
Oh god, I hate that episode so much. We can talk about that episode.
I mean, it ended in okay. So alright, so let's talk about the episode. With the episode, um, a new a new
Mhm,
woman supervillain is introduced, Femme Fatale. She goes around
mhm.
the banks stealing only Susan B coins.
Susan B. Anthony coins. Yeah,
Susan
that's
B
the only
Anthony.
thing she's
That's
stealing.
that's all she wants. So the girls come in, do what they do, stop her,
Mhm,
taking her to jail. And as she's taking them to jail, she's all like, "Well, if you take me to jail, then what other women villains gonna be out there? Like, we gotta stand up for one another. We gotta stick up and fight the man because we're being oppressed and whatnot."
mhm,
And she was asking them, "Oh, like how many super women do you know?" Right? Because Batman has something, Superman has something. Blossom goes, "Oh, Wonder Woman," and she's like, "Okay, name another one." And she's like, "Batgirl." It's like Batgirl does not count.
yeah.
She's on the Batman. Um, so do you remember like watching that episode for the first
I
time or
do.
like
I do
so?
remember watching that episode,
Mhm,
and, I mean, at the time when I was little, I liked it because it was
mhm,
Powerpuff Girls, and it was, like, a good episode. Um, but now as an adult, I realize how flawed that episode is because, like, I understand, like, what they were trying to do, I
mhm,
guess. Maybe I don't understand what they were trying to do, but the whole reason that she is a villain is because, Pokio not Pokioks, Townsville is a utopia. The show addresses that early on in the episode that like everyone's equal in Townsville. Everyone's equal. So of course, this crazy lady is like who's harping about feminism and she's wrong.
mhm,
She's crazy when actually everything that she says is absolutely true. Now,
mhm.
obviously, I don't approve of her being a villain, except I kind of do like go crazy, babe, like be a villain. But like, so that's why that episode bothers me because it's yeah, Townsville is, I guess, perfect, so you can have a villain that does that, but when we live in the real world, and that is a real problem, and women are treated incredibly unfairly in a lot of different ways, especially in law enforcement and incarceration, like, obviously, it's not good for men in incarceration, but, like, I was like, this episode isn't that great anymore."
I mean, the what saves it for me, is when the girls like they catch up to Femme Fatale, after having a talk with Miss Bellum and Miss Keen, right,
Yeah.
that's the teacher. Right? After having a talk with them, and like they list all these, I guess, somewhat facts. I haven't fact checked them,
They are
but
facts, yeah. That
I
actually I do like about the episode where they kind
yeah,
of, like, expose femme fatale for being, like, fake about
mm,
it and kind of using her status or her lack of status to justify her being a villain. But I don't know, I just feel like it now it kind of hits a little in not a great way because it's like, "No, that'd be nice to live in a perfect utopia."
that's fair. That is fair.
You know? But even so, like, Powerpuff Girls, I think, is a really feminist show, and I think that it handles a lot of those issues really well.
Hmm.
Um, and, I mean, like I said, a lot of those shows maybe weren't perfect examples of feminism because you do have to and I don't want to insult anyone who liked these shows, and I don't wanna necessarily, like, shit on them. But like when you have shows like The Winx Club or Witch, and it's like, why are these girls so provocatively dressed? Like,
I was gonna say
so
that
it's like
Yeah.
It's very 90s feminism, which is like girl power, but I'm gonna dress sexy about it because everyone is animated by a man. Um,
Yeah.
because it's all about intent. However, I do think that it's great that those shows even existed at all because because they were about girls and because they were for girls, even though they were fighting bad guys, even though Kim Possible, was beating up bad guys, at the end of the day, the thing that usually saved everyone, the thing that they usually were fighting for was love, was friendship, was equality. I mean, not to be like, oh, boy shows are all about violence and war, but I do think something that's so great about these shows that were more geared towards girls is that because they were like, "Oh, girls don't like bloody fights and war and guns and stuff," they had to, like, come up with something else.
Mm.
So they fight with love, they fight with the power of friendship. I mean, you know, which I think is great. I think that's so important that we were teaching girls how important relationships were, of all kinds.
Yeah.
Think about like My Little Pony or something. Like friendship is magic. That's what ends up saving the day. It's the friendship and the love and the care that all the ponies have for each other, you
Yeah.
know?
Um, that yeah, I could definitely agree with that. I would say that a show like Codename Kids Next Door, they had a nice blend of that type of messaging. They had
Mhm.
one specific episode where number four was sent to an all girls school. I think by accident or on
I
purpose.
feel like I know what episode you're talking about. Like I remember parts of it in my brain.
It was some weird mix up or something, and
Mhm.
um there's a fast forward, like there's a time skip in the
Mhm.
episode where girls have taken over the world, and all boys have been like either eradicated or destroyed or whatnot. Um, and the remaining, so the remaining of the kids next door, now number four is all old and wrinkly because of the time skip. Um, the remaining of the kids next door was all boys except for one girl who was a descendant of number three. And she has this such good speech where she goes, my grandmother told me, number three, that once there was a time where boys and girls, they fought adult tyranny together. There was no separation. There was this and that, yada yada.
Mm,
um you know shows shows had their moments where the messaging was actually full circle. There was no male gaze weirdness. There was
mhm,
no uh how did you phrase it? The whole trying to sell products type thing. It
mhm.
was just straightforward. Like boys and girls, we can, there's no issue. Doesn't have to be a divide. We could be equal. You
Yeah.
know, obviously there are times where things aren't fair, but we can fix it. We're the kids. We're the future. And I was like, revisiting it. I was like, wow, like that was a great message for
Yeah,
kids to hear.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I think the time period that we usually talk about, because those shows I think were so hyper focused and aware of diversity, they did end up having a lot of those like messages, which yeah can be a little trite sometimes and a little like ooey gooey sentimental, but I think ultimately they do more good than harm.
Mhm.
um because there is like there is truth in that, that they want girls and boys to understand that they are equal and that girls can do anything boys can do, and that sort of thing. um Something that I want to bring up, um so it's not exactly from the time period that we usually talk about, but it is something from my childhood. So when I was a kid, I watched a lot of Disney movies, obviously, if you couldn't tell. However, I wasn't super big into the princess movies. I was more into the animal Disney movies. And to this day, I really don't know why. I think it was just like those were the ones that my mom or like family members bought for me for whatever reason. I never asked, but they bought us like 101 Dalmatians, Aristocats, Oliver and Company. They didn't buy us like Sleeping Beauty or Cinderella.
Right.
Um, so it wasn't until later when I was more of an adult that I actually sat down and watched the princess movies, like all of them, because at that point I'd really only seen like a couple. Like I saw Mulan and Princess and the Frog and stuff, which are definitely much more like girl power, we're modern.
Mhm.
Um, and so I watched all the Disney princess movies and I fell in love with them. And I specifically fell in love with Snow White. I loved Snow White. And in the early 2000s, so I'm bringing it back. I know what I'm talking about. In the early 2000s, this woman wrote a book called Cinderella Ain't My Daughter. And it was a book about how the like girly pink Disney princessification, like that kind of was very in at the time, was like unfeminist, was bad for girls, was bad for boys. It was just horrible and terrible, and like was teaching these girls all these terrible life lessons. And I'm not a fan of that book.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of her points are very subjective, and I think a lot of it is like willfully misunderstanding and fear mongering. However, she did make some good points. I'm not going to deny that. I think there definitely was a big push for pink and for girly. And, I think that a lot of it was very capitalistic and corporate and calculated. So I'm not saying that she was wrong. Fast forward a couple years later, I'm in college and I read this book called In Defense of the Princess, which was sort of like this woman's like rebuttal to that book. Like she name drops it. And I was reading that book, and it's all about how princesses are a good thing. And she doesn't necessarily only talk about Disney princesses, but she talks about like real life ones and like superhero princesses. But she talks about the Disney princesses. And I realized that while, yes, a lot of the Disney princess movies are not the best in terms of feminism, mostly because they're products of their time, they are, I think, feminist themes in all of their movies, and I can
Mm.
make a case for all of them. Like I said, Snow White is my favorite Disney princess, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, she doesn't do anything. She like, she runs away. She like cleans a house for a bunch of men and cooks them dinner, and then she like dies and then gets woken up by a kiss." And it's like, yes, that is all true. You're not wrong, but Snow White is kind and
Mm.
she's helpful and she's trusting and she's open-minded, because she was a princess at one point and then she got turned into a scullery maid and then she meets the dwarves and she could have turned up her noses at them. She could have seen their house and been like, "Ew, I'm not helping all you weirdos," and walked
Right.
away, but she didn't. She was kind and she realized that she could clean their house and they would let her stay, and that's a great compromise. And in turn, the dwarves loved her and they respected her. They listened to her. They didn't treat her like a maid, they treated her like a friend. Um, and it was her kindness that saved her. A lot of people are like, "Oh, the prince kissed her because she was beautiful and, because blah, 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 blah." Which in the original fairy tale, yes, because in
Mm.
the original fairy tale, he kisses her because that was the first time he ever met her. But in the Disney version, which is what I'm talking about, he meets her earlier and they sing a song together and they realize that they have similar like hopes for the future. So yes, he kisses her without her consent, we know. He kisses
Mm.
her because she's beautiful, but because she's beautiful inside and out.
Mm.
And it was her kindness that saved her, because if she hadn't been so kind, if she hadn't been so beautiful inside and out, the dwarves would have never buried her above ground in a glass coffin. They would have buried her underground and then she would have been dead. Like
Mm.
the Wicked Witch, the reason that she gives her the apple is because she'll die and then the dwarves will bury her and bury her alive. But the dwarves don't. They bury her in a glass coffin because she's so beautiful and they want to mourn her.
Mm.
And the reason they wanna mourn her is not just because she was pretty, but because she was kind and she was helpful and she was, you know and she cared about people and she gave them hope. And so that's why I think, like, it's so important to kind of have all of these different, like, kind of ideas of feminism. Because you can have the Kim Possible girl power beat 'em up, which is valid, it's very valid, you
Right.
know, but you can also have the Snow White, or the Cinderella, which is like all these girls wanna do is be happy in their simple lives? Like, all Cinderella wanted to do was go to a party and, and that's fine, like, that's feminist too. And so I think it's really good that we have these different types of female characters that girls can look up to, because And I think another great example of feminism with, like, old stories is, like, the Barbie movies,
Mm,
which are phenomenal, A+ God tier, like, Prince and the Pauper, my jam. But what's really cool about the Barbie movies is that they will take stories that are traditionally not very feminist. Usually,
right.
the princess plays a passive role. I'm thinking like Swan Lake and Rapunzel and stuff like that. And they will make it feminist by giving her more agency. So, in Rapunzel, in the Barbie version, instead of, the prince coming to rescue her and that's the end of the story, Rapunzel finds a way to leave the castle and save herself. And along the way, she meets the prince who respects her, is kind to her, treats her well. And so when he does come and say, "Rapunzel, let down your hair," she does it because she knows him and because she likes him. Um, and you have like Barbie Swan Lake, where obviously she's like captured and she's trapped as a swan, but
Mm,
it's her who saves the prince from the evil Rothbard and Odile. Like, it's her, she saves them, you know, which is wonderful. I think it's wonderful that we had, and I had, especially as a child, all these different types of women to look up to. So I had the, Kim Possible, jeans and a t-shirt, you know, yeah, she was feminine, but not super feminine. And then I also had Barbie, who was very feminine. And both of these women were strong and powerful and intelligent and caring, and I think that's great.
yeah,
Because, like
yeah,
I said, even though these weren't perfect examples of feminism, even though, you know, they leaned a little more capitalistic, at the end of the day, all these shows and movies gave me women to look at and to model myself against and to think about and to care about, which is great because for so long girls didn't have that,
right.
Boys got every kind of character, but now girls were getting every kind of character, which is always good.
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know, um, yeah, oh man, I care a lot actually about the princess movies, like the Disney princess movies, and I'll defend them to the death. Um, so yeah.
those times, yeah, they did have a interesting blend of a lot of everything. So a lot that could be criticized, a lot that could be remembered fondly. A lot that you look back and you be like, huh, like okay, like I was told this as a kid, and I'm happy that I was told this as a kid. Like maybe even though it may not have registered then, like to know that I was exposed to something like that, it's like, oh wow, that was pretty cool. Um, I just think it's interesting seeing everyone around this time growing up and finding out different things, and when it comes to feminism and you know uh understanding that growing up understanding that the movement isn't also perfect, because there's a race issue and
Mhm,
whatnot. Um,
absolutely.
and now with the cis women versus trans women, like that's the issue now. But the fact that we were exposed to the stuff early on, being able to process it as we grow older, now
Mhm,
we're able to look at things, judge things how we want to judge them. And just like in that episode, Kiss Next Door, we are the
mhm.
future, and we can make a change. We can make things better.
Yeah,
Um, and I just think it's funny with there's one funny moment with the throwaway joke in Spider Verse when Peter B. Parker was saying, "I'm gonna look at the head scientist," and Miles go, "Actually, that woman over there is the head scientist." It's like, "Oh, okay. Step number 3, I'm gonna reevaluate my personal biases." Like I thought
yeah,
that was hilarious.
yeah, yeah. I think ultimately the goal of children's shows,
Mm,
especially if they're educational, is to introduce children to topics that they can later expound upon and later think about more complexly. Um, like for example, like you teach kids ABCs in children's shows, you don't teach them how to spell like transcendentalism,
right.
they learn that later. So this is that. It's just, we're teaching kids the basics. Everyone's equal, whether you're a girl or a boy, it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want to do. And then as they grow up and they watch more TV or they read more books, they can, expand upon that and learn a little more and get a little nuance and, you know, And ultimately, I think we were, again, with the diversity, we were lucky in that way that we had those shows and those examples, looking up to, you know, because yeah, it was really interesting in the 90s how like girl power was very commodified. It's very interesting to think about that they did that. Like I can't help but think about like the Spice Girls
Mm.
and just like girl power. And it's like, okay, but like what? Like what are you
Right,
doing with that girl power?
right.
But at least it got the idea into our heads.
Mm. There,
Yeah.
I would say there was a lot of episodes of different cartoons where uh, a female character would challenge the status quo, like
Yes.
uh, fa- not Family Guy, fuck it, Proud Family. Jeez
Mhm.
Louise, Proud Family had an episode where Penny wanted to play football. She was adamant about
Mhm.
playing football. They let her play football. Um, Avatar: The Last Airbender, when
Mhm.
Katara went to the North Pole, challenged I
Paku.
forgot his name. Paku challenged Paku. It's like, hey, listen, I don't want to be a healer. I can heal, yeah, sure, but I want to fight. Like,
Yep.
you gonna teach me, or like you about to catch these hands? Like, what's up? What we doing right now? Um, and even though for me, I feel a lot of things went over my head as a kid, those moments do stick out,
Mhm.
and I remember rooting for those characters, rooting for Katara, rooting for Penny, but like, why can't she play football? I don't understand. Like, why does Katara has to be a healer?
Mhm.
I remember being confused watching. Like, what's the issue? Like, let her fight. She's a good fighter.
Yeah.
She damn near better than Aang. Like, what are we talking about right now, bro? So yeah, yeah, it's
And that's the way to do it, like because so even though some of the things went over your head, you do have these memories and that's all it takes, just a little seed and then, that's what gets kids to kind of question and think about the world that they're in.
yeah,
Um but also another kind of I think subtle feminist thing from a lot of the shows we watched as kids is that a lot of the shows, because they were children's shows and the parents had to be like out of the way for like the adventures to happen, a lot of them had the mom and the dad working,
yeah,
which like nowadays that's normal, like whatever. But even back in the 90s, that was still kind of like a newer thing of moms going off to work.
hmm,
Um, so for a lot of these shows, live action and cartoon, to have their moms be successful in their career just like their dad, I think I think also really helped. And I think to kind of push the idea that like people were equal and people could do whatever they want, gender didn't matter. Um, you know?
yeah.
Yeah. So
That is
yeah, yeah,
interesting.
like yeah.
Because you think back, like what before then, like those who grew up in the, let's say, 80s, 70s, 60s, is always, oh, a woman's place is in the kitchen.
Yep.
And now we transition to the 90s, those kids are now grown up, and it's like, nah, fuck that. So now they put in their shows, a man comes up, a woman's place is in the kitchen, and the women be like, excuse me, you want to say that again?
Yeah.
You want to say that again? Like now, like it's really cool. And now here we are, our generation, and we're still fighting against certain
Yeah.
uh things, stigmas and whatnot. It's, yeah,
Yeah.
evolution. There you go. Right?
And also something else that I just thought about like right now.
Mm,
So on TikTok, and granted it could be because of my TikTok algorithm and what I see, but I feel like now in our generation as well as in the newer generation where there's like this thing among women where we're not putting up with it anymore.
mm,
And a lot of women are basically saying we are not going to be taking care of our partners the way that maybe our moms did or our grandmas. We're not going to mother them. We're not going to let them, you know, be kind of horrible to us. Like, we demand to be treated with respect and love.
yep.
Um, and we're not going to like let you treat us that way. And one of the reasons maybe that I think that and that these other girls are like starting to come to this realization that they don't have to be someone's mother and their girlfriend is because I feel like in a lot of children's shows the dad was equally present with the mom.
Mm,
Like I feel like in TV shows if like the characters walked to school with their parents, half the time it would be the mom, half the time it would be the dad.
Mm.
Like and granted, I think it's because like obviously it's a kid show, they're not going to show like a failing marriage,
Yeah.
but I do remember so distinctly a lot of the times the family units and the husband and wife units in children's show were always very healthy because they had to be. And because they were healthy, the husband and the wife shared duties. They shared responsibilities. And so I think that now, as my generation is growing up and the younger one is too, and we're being told by our boyfriends, like, oh, I don't know how to do the dishes, or oh, I'm bad at doing laundry. Will you do it for me? Like, bitch, no. The
Right.
parents on Gullah Gullah Island did everything equally, you know?
Yeah.
Like, like, so like I'm not gonna like stand for it, like,
Yeah. And you shouldn't. Yeah.
so yeah, I think that was also something that they did that was like feminist and helped kind of push that idea that people were equal and that people should be doing the equal like division of labor,
Yeah.
because it was modeled to us. These healthy families, healthy friendships, healthy relationships, it was all modeled out for us. And yeah, it may have been a little simplistic, but we were given the ground tools. We were given the base foundation to really make sure that we have those in our own lives,
Yeah.
you know?
All right.
Okay.
That was pretty good. I like that.
Anything else to say? Should I go over another Disney movie and explain how it's feminist? Because I could. That could be a whole episode on
It
its
could.
own.
I mean, we could do it.
No, we're running out of time. I don't want to keep anyone too long. Um, okay, but this was a very good conversation.
Mm,
I really enjoyed it because obviously, like feminism is something that I care a lot
mm.
about. I was a women's studies minor. I did all that.
Right.
Okay, so at the bottom of the screen again, we're going to be listing our social media. Please give us a follow, a like, a comment. Maybe tell us your favorite like girl power, movie or character that we maybe didn't mention, or maybe tell us of a time when you were able to kind of be feminist as a kid, and it made you feel really proud, like you stood up to a bully or a boy or something.
Yeah, let us know. We're looking in the comments. We want to have a conversation. Let's open it up.
Mhm.
Start a dialogue. It'll
Yep.
be interesting.
Yeah. Also, just as a quick little thing, feminism is for boys too. Feminism benefits men and women and those not on the binary. I'm just saying, I just want to put that out there because we've been talking a lot about girls.
Mm,
Feminism is for everybody and it benefits everybody. Okay.
yes. Yes, it does.
Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next week.
See ya.
Bye.